In the midst of a tense, high-profile murder trial, the courtroom buzzes with the hum of whispered speculations and scribbling reporters. Suddenly, the heavy air is pierced by the clear, assertive voice of a young boy. "Wait! You must listen to me! I know the truth!" shouts Jacob Turner, standing defiantly in the aisle. His words slice through the monotony of legal proceedings, causing a stunned silence to fall over the room. Every eye turns towards him, including those of the stern Judge Simmons, who peers over her glasses with a mix of surprise and skepticism. As whispers turn to murmurs, Jacob's claim hangs heavily in the air. He has evidence that could shatter the case against Michael Reed, the man wrongfully accused.
Before we dive into today's story, we'd love your support. If you enjoy our content, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Your engagement helps us create more inspiring stories just for you. Now, without further ado, let's get started.
Jacob Turner was not your ordinary 10-year-old. With an uncanny ability to notice things others missed, he carried a sense of justice far beyond his years. His classmates at school often joked that he had the makings of a detective, always curious about the why and how of everything around him. On this particular day, that keen observation was about to disrupt the course of a murder trial and challenge the preconceptions of every adult in the room. The courtroom was a grand chamber, walls lined with dark wood paneling, towering bookshelves filled with legal tomes, and the imposing bench where Judge Elaine Simmons presided. Today, it was packed to the brim with a bustling crowd. Reporters filled their notepads, eager to document a trial that had gripped the city's attention. Michael Reed, a middle-aged schoolteacher with a gentle demeanor, stood accused of a crime he fervently denied: the murder of Clara Bell, a local businesswoman whose untimely death had sparked outrage and mystery. Judge Simmons, known for her stringent adherence to the law and her no-nonsense courtroom demeanor, had just begun to address the jury when Jacob's voice cut through the murmur like a sharp blade. "Wait! You must listen to me! I know the truth!" His bold interruption caused a ripple of shock that silenced the whispers and halted the proceedings. Michael Reed's lawyer, a weary-eyed man who had seen too many years in the courtroom, paused mid-sentence, his mouth agape. The prosecutor, a sharp and meticulous woman, snapped her head towards Jacob, her eyes narrowing in disbelief. Jacob's small frame stood stark against the rows of dark-suited adults, his messy brown hair tousled as if he'd run all the way to the courthouse. His cheeks were flushed with a mix of determination and nervousness, his hands clenched at his sides. As the bailiff moved towards him, Judge Simmons raised her hand, signaling him to stop. The room held its breath, waiting to see how the judge would handle this unprecedented disruption. "Son, this is a courtroom, not a playground. What is the meaning of this interruption?" Judge Simmons' voice was stern, yet tinged with curiosity. Her gaze was piercing, yet not unkind, a look that sought the truth, however unexpected its source might be. Jacob met her gaze, undeterred. "Your Honor, I need to say something important. It's about Mr. Reed and what really happened to Ms. Bell. You're accusing the wrong person." His voice, though trembling, carried a sincerity that could not be easily dismissed. The courtroom erupted into whispers once again as spectators and legal professionals alike tried to make sense of the situation. Could this child possibly know something critical to the case? Was this merely a boy's misinterpretation of events? Or had he indeed stumbled upon a pivotal piece of evidence? As the judge considered her next actions, Jacob's mother, seated at the back of the courtroom, covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes wide with alarm and pride. She knew her son's spirit all too well. Jacob had a habit of diving headfirst into matters of right and wrong, his heart always guiding his actions. Judge Simmons finally nodded to the bailiff, who gently guided Jacob away from the center aisle, not to eject him, but to prepare him to speak formally. "We will hear what the boy has to say," she declared, addressing the courtroom with a tone that brooked no argument. "Prepare to reconvene in 15 minutes. As Jacob was led away, the crowd buzzed with renewed vigor, speculating wildly about the turn of events. Meanwhile, Michael Reed looked up for the first time since the trial began, his eyes meeting Jacob's with a mixture of confusion and a faint glimmer of hope. This unexpected twist was just the beginning, and as the courtroom doors closed behind him, Jacob knew he had just stepped into a role much larger than he had ever imagined. His journey to bring the truth to light was not going to be easy, but it was one he was determined to see through, no matter the challenges that lay ahead. In the relative calm of Judge Simmons' chambers, the stark contrast to the chaotic courtroom was palpable. The room was lined with shelves of legal books, each spine telling a story of cases past and the weight of the law. Jacob, despite the imposing setting, felt a peculiar sense of calm wash over him as he stood before Judge Simmons, her stern face now softened slightly in the privacy of her office. "Jacob," Judge Simmons began, her voice steady and clear, "you've made a serious claim today. It's imperative that you tell us everything you know. Remember, this is a very serious matter." Beside her, Michael Reed's lawyer, Mr. Thomas Elliott, sat with a notepad ready, his earlier fatigue replaced by an alert focus. Jacob nodded, gathering his thoughts. "It all started about a month ago," he began, his voice firm, despite his nerves. "I was at the park near my house. I go there a lot to read and watch the birds. That day, I saw Mr. Reed there too. He was with another woman, not Miss Bell." Judge Simmons raised an eyebrow, interjecting, "Are you certain it was Mr. Reed you saw?" "Yes, I'm sure," Jacob affirmed. "I've seen him around the neighborhood before. He lives not too far from my house." "Continue," Judge Simmons prompted, her gaze never wavering from Jacob's face. "They seemed upset," Jacob continued. "They were arguing about something. I couldn't hear everything, but it looked serious. The woman was very agitated. She had blonde hair, not like Miss Bell's, which was dark. I remember because the sun was shining on her hair, making it almost glow." Mr. Elliott scribbled notes feverishly, occasionally glancing up to monitor Jacob's expressions and reactions. "What happened next, Jacob?" "The woman tried to walk away, but Mr. Reed held her arm to stop her. He looked worried, not angry. It seemed like he was trying to calm her down, not hurt her," Jacob explained, his eyes wide with the vividness of his memory. "And then?" Judge Simmons urged, leaning forward. "Then she pulled away and left the park in a hurry. Mr. Reed stayed behind, looking really upset. He sat on a bench for a long time after she left." Judge Simmons and Mr. Elliott exchanged a glance. "Did you see where the woman went?" Mr. Elliott asked. "No, she walked off towards the street. And then I couldn't see her anymore," Jacob replied. His focus on the details was impeccable, providing a clear narrative that painted a different picture from the one presented in court. Judge Simmons leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled under her chin. "Jacob, this is crucial information, but it's also very different from the story we've been told. Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Jacob's face fell slightly, a mixture of guilt and resolve playing out across his features. "I didn't think it was important at first, and I was scared. But when I saw the news and heard that Mr. Reed was being accused of killing Miss Bell, I knew I had to say something. What if he didn't do it? What if it was a mistake?" Mr. Elliott nodded, his expression softening. "Thank you, Jacob. What you've done is very brave." Judge Simmons stood up, pacing slowly in front of her desk. "This does indeed cast a new light on the case. However, we need to verify your account and see if it aligns with other evidence." "Can I go now?" Jacob asked, his small voice tinged with hope. "Not yet," Judge Simmons replied. "We have a few more questions, and we need to discuss what happens next. You understand that we have to be thorough, right?" Jacob nodded, the gravity of the situation settling on his shoulders. As the questions continued, Jacob described the woman in more detail, and Mr. Elliott took notes on everything. Judge Simmons finally called for a recess in the trial, deciding that further investigation was necessary to explore the new lead Jacob had provided. As Jacob was led out of the room, he felt a weight lift slightly, hopeful that his information might help prove Mr. Reed's innocence. He didn't know what would happen next, but he felt a deep sense of satisfaction that he had done the right thing. Meanwhile, Judge Simmons and Mr. Elliot discussed the next steps, both aware that the case they thought was nearly closed had just been blown wide open. This development in the case introduced not only a potential for Michael Reed's exoneration, but also opened up a myriad of legal complexities that would need to be navigated with utmost diligence and care. The journey ahead would be arduous, but with Jacob's testimony, the path to truth had been irrevocably set into motion. In the wake of Jacob's testimony, the courtroom was fraught with tension. Legal professionals and observers alike were skeptical of the sudden twist introduced by a child's unexpected intervention. Mr. Elliot, Michael Reed's defense attorney, knew he faced an uphill battle. The challenge wasn't just in proving Michael's innocence, but also in convincing a courtroom that the word of a 10-year-old could be reliable and substantial enough to reconsider a nearly concluded murder case. As the trial resumed, Judge Simmons addressed the court with a tone of cautious consideration. "We are presented with a unique situation," she announced. "A young witness has come forward with information that, if true, could significantly impact the outcome of this trial. It is our duty to explore every possible angle of a case, especially when a man's life hangs in the balance." The prosecutor, Ms. Linda Harris, was visibly frustrated by the development. She stood, smoothing the fabric of her suit, her voice sharp as she addressed the judge. "Your Honor, while we respect the court's decision to consider all testimonies, we must also consider the reliability of our sources. We are now asked to place significant weight on the observations of a child who, by his own admission, did not come forward with his information until prompted by the developments of this trial." Jacob sat beside Mr. Elliot, his small frame dwarfed by the heavy wooden chair. He listened intently, his hands clenched in his lap, as Ms. Harris continued to cast doubt on his credibility. How are we to know the child has not been influenced by family or media? How can we ensure his testimony is not simply a product of a child's imagination or misunderstanding of adult conversations? Mr. Elliot rose, his voice calm, yet firm. "Your Honor, it is not unheard of for children to be key witnesses in serious cases." Jacob Turner came forward out of a sense of civic duty, compelled by his own conscience to speak the truth as he perceives it. "We have a responsibility not to dismiss his testimony simply because of his age, but rather to scrutinize it in the context of all evidence." The room buzzed with murmurs as Mr. Elliot called for expert testimonies on child witnesses and their reliability. Psychologists and child behavior experts took the stand, discussing the cognitive abilities of children to remember and recount events accurately under the right circumstances. Meanwhile, Jacob struggled with the weight of the courtroom's eyes upon him. At school, he was often praised for his maturity and insight, but here, in this grand room filled with adults, his age became a barrier he had never before had to face in such a profound way. Each skeptical glance and whispered doubt chipped away at his confidence. Outside the courtroom, during recesses, Jacob's mother tried to bolster his spirits. "You did the right thing, Jacob," she reassured him, kneeling to look him in the eye. "No matter what happens, I'm proud of you for standing up for what you believe is right. That takes more courage than most people have in a lifetime." Jacob nodded, but the uncertainty remained. He couldn't help but overhear snippets of conversation, lawyers and journalists questioning the validity of his testimony, debating whether his intervention was a help or a hindrance to the case. As the trial progressed, the defense introduced new evidence supporting Jacob's version of events. Surveillance footage from the park on the day of the alleged argument was obtained, showing Michael Reed with a woman who was clearly not Clara Bell. Further, a witness who frequented the same park came forward, corroborating Jacob's testimony about the argument and confirming the woman's distinct blonde hair. Despite these developments, the shadow of doubt lingered. Ms. Harris cross-examined every piece of new evidence with a sharpness that left no room for error. She pointed out time gaps in the surveillance footage and questioned the reliability of the new witness, suggesting that the defense was clutching at straws. Jacob felt the pressure of the courtroom's skepticism, as if it were a physical weight upon his shoulders. He knew what he had seen, but the constant questioning and doubts made him question himself. Was he really helping, or had he just complicated things further for everyone involved? The emotional turmoil was immense. Yet, through it all, Jacob's determination did not waver. He clung to what he knew to be true, driven by a deep-seated belief in justice and a desire to ensure that no innocent person, like Michael Reed, should suffer a wrongful conviction. As the trial neared its conclusion, Jacob awaited the outcome with bated breath. He had done everything within his power to set the record straight. Now, it was up to the jury and the judge to decide the weight of a child's word against the backdrop of adult skepticism and legal scrutiny. The courtroom hushed as Jacob Turner was called back to the witness stand, his earlier testimony having ignited a flurry of legal activity. As he settled into the witness box, Judge Simmons gave him a reassuring nod, indicating he should speak clearly and truthfully as he had before. "Jacob," Mr. Elliott began, standing beside a projector ready to display evidence. "You've told us about the argument you witnessed in the park. Now, can you describe in more detail what the woman looked like, and anything else that might help us identify her?" Jacob nodded, his voice steady despite the weight of the courtroom's gaze. "Yes, sir. She was tall, taller than Mr. Reed. She had very bright blonde hair, cut short, and she was wearing a red jacket, even though it was quite warm that day. That's why I noticed her. She seemed overdressed." Mr. Elliott clicked the remote, and a freeze frame from the park's surveillance video appeared on the screen, showing a woman matching Jacob's description. "Is this the woman you saw?" "Yes, that's her," Jacob exclaimed, pointing at the screen. "And what were they arguing about, if you could hear?" Jacob furrowed his brow, trying to recall. "I couldn't hear everything, but she kept saying things like, 'You can't do this anymore,' and 'It's over.' Mr. Reed looked really upset, but he wasn't yelling like she was." "Thank you, Jacob," Mr. Elliott said, then turned to address the court. "Your Honor, we have identified the woman in the video as Ms. Natalie Porter, a former business associate of Clara Bell, the victim." Ms. Harris stood abruptly, her expression one of skepticism. "Your Honor, this is preposterous. Introducing a new suspect at this stage based on a child's testimony and a video of a public argument?" "Ms. Harris, we are not merely speculating," Mr. Elliott countered as he presented a folder of documents to the judge. "We have obtained evidence that Ms. Porter and Ms. Bell were embroiled in a significant financial dispute, which gives Ms. Porter a motive." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as Mr. Elliott detailed the financial entanglements and the subsequent fallout between Natalie Porter and Clara Bell, supported by bank statements and heated email exchanges. "Moreover," Mr. Elliott continued, "we have a witness statement from a park employee who confirms that Ms. Porter often wore a distinctive red jacket, even in warm weather, due to a medical condition." Judge Simmons, who had been listening intently, called for silence. "Let's proceed methodically. Mr. Elliott, call your next witness." As the trial progressed, the focus shifted dramatically. Surveillance footage from a nearby cafe was introduced, showing Natalie Porter in the vicinity just before the time Jacob had witnessed the argument. Cell phone records were subpoenaed, placing her at the park during the critical period. Each piece of new evidence seemed to corroborate Jacob's account, gradually shifting the narrative of the trial. The defense's argument gained traction, bolstered by the tangible links between Natalie Porter and the circumstances surrounding Clara Bell's death. Jacob watched, wide-eyed, as the adults around him debated and dissected the information he had provided, It was both overwhelming and empowering to see his observations taken seriously, to see the grown-ups scrambling to piece together a puzzle he had unknowingly contributed a crucial piece to. In a striking moment of the trial, Ms. Harris cross-examined Natalie Porter, who had been compelled to testify. Under intense scrutiny, Ms. Porter's composure cracked, and she admitted to the argument with Michael Reed, though she vehemently denied any involvement in Clara Bell's death. "The argument was about business," Ms. Porter stated, her voice trembling. She was threatening to ruin me, to expose mistakes I made, mistakes that could have destroyed my career. I was angry, yes, but I did not hurt her. I left the park. That was the last time I saw her." As the trial neared its climax, the jury was left to sift through the emotional testimonies, the digital evidence, and the conflicting motivations of the involved parties. Jacob's role became the fulcrum on which the scales of justice seemed to balance, his simple yet sharp observations calling everything into question. Judge Simmons summed up the case, reminding the jury of their duty to consider all the evidence, emphasizing how even seemingly minor details could illuminate the truth. "You must decide," she concluded, "based on the weight of what has been presented, including the testimony of young Mr. Turner, whose courage to speak up has brought us to this pivotal point." The courtroom awaited the jury's decision with bated breath. Jacob sat between his mother and Mr. Elliot, feeling an odd mixture of anxiety and hope. Regardless of the outcome, he understood now more than ever the profound impact of truth and the immense responsibility that came with wielding it. As the jury returned, ready to deliver their verdict, the tension in the air was palpable. Jacob held his mother's hand tightly, waiting to hear the words that would conclude this unexpected chapter of his young life. The hush that settled over the courtroom as the jury filed back in was palpable, every spectator and participant on edge. The judge called for order, and the head juror stood, a piece of paper trembling slightly in his hand. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Michael Reed, not guilty," he declared, his voice echoing across the suddenly silent room. A collective sigh rippled through the courtroom, mixed with murmurs of disbelief and relief. Michael Reed slumped forward, his face in his hands, overwhelmed by emotion. Beside Jacob, Mr. Elliot placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, whispering words of gratitude and pride. Jacob looked around, his young eyes wide as he absorbed the reactions of those around him. His testimony, once doubted and scrutinized, had led to a pivotal turn in the trial, introducing new evidence that ultimately exonerated an innocent man. The weight of his impact was immense, and for a moment he felt both dwarfed and uplifted by the significance of his actions. Judge Simmons addressed the court, her voice firm, but not without a trace of warmth. "This case has reminded us of the importance of thoroughness in the pursuit of justice," she said. "Let it also serve as a reminder of our duty to consider all credible evidence, regardless of the source." The courtroom slowly emptied, the buzz of excited and intense conversations filling the air. Reporters hurried out, eager to update their audiences on the unexpected outcome of what had been one of the most closely followed trials of the year. In the wake of the verdict, legal discussions flourished both in the corridors of the courthouse and in the media. Legal analysts debated the implications of Jacob's role in the trial, discussing the potential need for procedural adjustments when dealing with young witnesses in serious cases. Mr. Elliot, while packing up his briefcase, took a moment to speak to a small group of journalists. "Today, a young boy's courage not only saved an innocent man, but also challenged us to reflect on our judicial processes," he stated. "His willingness to come forward, to speak up in a room full of doubting adults, has brought justice where it may have otherwise been denied." Jacob's mother, holding his hand tightly, navigated through the crowd, her eyes moist with tears of pride. "I always taught him to speak the truth," she told a reporter who had approached them for a comment. "Today, he showed me what that can truly mean." As the media frenzy continued outside, inside the now nearly empty courtroom, Judge Simmons discussed with her clerks the implications of the case. "We need to review how we handle young witnesses," she mused. "This case has shown that they can provide valuable insights, but we must ensure they are protected and their testimony is fairly evaluated without prejudice." Back at home, Jacob and his mother sat at their kitchen table, the day's events unfolding again in their conversation. "Did I really do the right thing, Mom?" Jacob asked, his voice tinged with lingering doubt, despite the outcome. "You did, Jacob. You helped reveal the truth," his mother reassured him, squeezing his hand. "Sometimes doing the right thing isn't easy, and it doesn't always feel good. But today, it was necessary. You should be proud." In the following days, the story of Jacob's crucial role in the trial was featured in news outlets, sparking discussions about the capabilities of young individuals in critical situations. Law schools referenced the case in classes about ethics and the justice system, using it as a real-world example of the impact of integrity and bravery. The legal community took steps to propose guidelines for the inclusion and protection of minors who possess important information about legal cases. These discussions emphasized training for legal professionals in techniques to appropriately question younger witnesses, ensuring they are both respected and protected throughout the process. As for Jacob, the experience sparked a newfound interest in the workings of the judicial system. His school invited him to speak to his classmates about his experience, and he was met with curious and admiring peers. Though young, he had seen firsthand the complexities and the gravity of the law, and he approached his future with a deeper appreciation for the principles of justice and truth. The case also served as a catalyst for broader dialogues about justice and transparency, reinforcing the community's trust in the legal system while acknowledging areas for improvement. Jacob, at the center of this pivotal moment, found himself growing from the quiet observer at the park to a symbol of civic duty and the power of truth. As the reverberations of the trial's conclusion echoed throughout the community and beyond, Jacob Turner found himself at the heart of a profound transformation, not just within the confines of the courtroom, but in the wider discourse on justice and the role of youth in shaping it. In the days following the trial, Jacob's school organized an assembly to honor his bravery. Teachers and students alike listened intently as Jacob recounted his experience, his voice steady, his narrative punctuated by moments of uncertainty and resolve. The principal presented Jacob with a Courage in Community Award, recognizing his critical thinking and moral courage. "Jacob's actions remind us that truth has no age barrier," the principal stated, addressing the assembly. "He has shown us that even the youngest among us can carry the light of justice." At home, Jacob's mother, Sarah, organized a small gathering to celebrate his bravery. Family and close friends filled their modest living room, sharing stories of Jacob's keen observations from an early age. Laughter and pride warmed the room, reinforcing the support system that had bolstered Jacob's resolve to speak up. During the gathering, Jacob's uncle Thomas, a retired police officer, pulled him aside. "You know, Jacob, what you did was not just brave. It was essential," he said, his eyes earnest. "You've changed a man's life, but you've also touched on something bigger, the trust we place in our justice system, and how everyone, no matter their age, plays a part in that system." The media coverage of the trial, intensified by the dramatic turn of events brought about by Jacob's testimony, spurred a series of op-eds and feature articles on the credibility and rights of young witnesses. Legal analysts cited the case as a pivotal example of the need for courts to adapt to the nuances of involving young individuals in legal processes. Jacob's story also reached online forums and social media, sparking widespread discussions about children's roles in civic duties. In blog posts and comments, people debated how society often underestimates the observations and contributions of the younger generation. Meanwhile, at the local university, a law professor named Dr. Helen Baxter used Jacob's case as a case study in her class on legal ethics. Jacob Turner's involvement in the Reed trial challenges us to consider how the legal system can better protect and include young witnesses while ensuring justice is served, Dr. Baxter explained to her students. She encouraged them to think critically about legal safeguards for young participants in judicial proceedings. In response to the widespread discussion, a local legislator proposed Jacob's Law, aimed at establishing clearer guidelines for the treatment of minors involved in legal testimonies. The law sought to ensure that young witnesses received psychological support and that their testimony was handled with the utmost respect and consideration for their age and vulnerability. As these discussions unfolded, Jacob himself felt a growing sense of responsibility. Inspired by the impact of his actions, he began to engage more with community issues, attending town hall meetings with his mother and participating in youth groups focused on civic education. A few months after the trial, Judge Simmons invited Jacob to the courthouse for a day of learning. Jacob shadowed the judge, observing proceedings and asking insightful questions. Judge Simmons, impressed with Jacob's curiosity and understanding, remarked to her colleagues, "This young man reminds us that our legal system, at its core, is about serving justice and truth regardless of one's age." As Jacob's story continued to resonate, he received letters from students and adults alike, expressing admiration and sharing how his courage had inspired them to speak up in their own lives. One letter from a girl his age read, "Your story showed me that what I see and what I say can make a difference. Thank you for helping me believe that my voice matters too." Reflecting on the whirlwind of experiences, Jacob journaled about his journey, his thoughts profound and introspective. "Before all this, I thought bravery was about being fearless. Now I know it's about doing what's right, even when you are afraid. I've learned that the truth is powerful, and standing up for it can change things, sometimes in ways you never expected." As the year drew to a close, Jacob, his family, and those touched by his actions gathered for a community event celebrating local heroes. Jacob was asked to light the community lantern, a symbol of hope and guiding light for the year ahead. With the flicker of the lantern's flame reflecting in his eyes, Jacob felt a deep sense of purpose. The challenges he had faced had not only altered the course of Michael Reed's life, but had also ignited a broader dialogue about justice and the role of youth in advocating for truth. Through his unexpected journey, Jacob Turner had not only grown in understanding of the law, but had also matured into a young advocate for justice, his actions a testament to the ripple effect one young voice can have in a vast ocean of societal norms and expectations. His story, a beacon of youth empowerment and the enduring quest for justice, would inspire and instruct for years to come.